of the utility that's driving the rate increases, and so there is no net impact for incremental needs to meet the coverage test. Essentially, it's already met through the cash needs. The city does have 2 outstanding revenue bonds, and the plan does call for the need for additional revenue bonds over the study period, so this policy would be maintained in the future years. Debt management, this is really just looking at what is a prudent balance between using cash to finance your capital improvement program or issuing debt to pay for the capital improvement. Kind of the rule of thumb industry standard is to maintain a ratio of no greater than 50% debt to 50% equity. And a general rule of thumb following that is to debt finance no more than about 75% of your rolling 6-year capital improvement, and that's really just kind of a guideline to give you an idea. Issue debt for major capital projects with longer useful lives, and especially when interest rates are low, looking at opportunities for debt financing your longer useful life projects. Looking at the water and sewer utilities, currently your debt to equity ratio is about 25% debt to about 75% equity, which puts you well in line with the recommended industry standards. And we would expect that even with the new debt needed for the capital improvement program, that you would remain within the industry guidelines for the study period. Looking at the use of the system development charge revenues, the city has historically used system development charge revenues to help pay a portion of its annual debt service that was budgeted and used up through 2010. And what our recommendation here is to restrict the use of the system development charge revenues to actually fund capital projects only, and then to set the rates at a level to pay for the annual debt service. Kind of the purpose of this kind of a strategy is that if the system development charges would be a source of funding for future capital needs, this would mitigate the financial risks of relying on a pretty volatile revenue source, which goes up and down in years, to rely on an annual committed amount of debt service coverage. Certainly legally, connection charges can be used to fund capital projects or debt service payments, but the conservative recommendation, and again preferences by bond writers and others, is that you use those to pay for the capital projects. And so we have implemented that for 2011 going forward. Just to give an idea of that impact for the utilities, for water, in 2010 about 50% of the revenue collected from SDCs was used to help pay debt service. That was about $26,000, and about 50% of sewer system development charges, or about $76,000, were used to help pay debt service. 2011 going forward, we would be showing that rates will be recovering all of the debt service. So that kind of summarizes what the fiscal policies are. They kind of set the framework for putting together the revenue requirement analysis for each utility. So then looking next at the revenue requirement analysis, this is a multi-year financial plan that determines the amount of revenue needed in each year over the study period to meet all of the utilities' financial obligations. That includes the financial policy impacts that we just went through, the capital program impacts, and your operating and maintenance costs. Then it evaluates the sufficiency of your current rates to meet those needs over the planning horizon, develops a rate implementation strategy of how you're going to increase rates over time to meet the needs, and then determines the amount that needs to be recovered through your rate structures. In putting this together, we first look at some kind of economic and financial forecasting assumptions. The growth forecast used in the analysis is showing a ramp up from about 0.25% in the current year to about 1% over the study period, again being conservative on the potential growth forecast. Cost escalation looks at labor costs going up at about 5% per year. Benefits usually go up a couple percentage points higher, estimated at about 7%. Operations-related costs, things for supplies and expenditures of that nature, about 1% in the current year, kind of representative of where inflation is now, and moving back up to about 3% for the remainder of the study period. Construction costs for the capital program is looking at about a 3% cost inflation in the early part of the study, going up to about 4% thereafter. Again, these are kind of in line with what the historical averages are of the inflation inflationary factors. The interest earnings are again showing up, ramping up from about 0.5% now up to about 3% over the study period, kind of based on current projections as well as what the historical norms have been, which we are not close to at these days. Looking at the capital financing assumptions, these are the terms of if going out for loans or bonds to finance the capital project. So we're proposing that any debt needs would come from either a USDA loan, which is for specific 2011 water projects, with all other needs coming from the issuance of revenue bonds. So the revenue bonds have a 20-year term, currently running at about a 4.5% interest rate and 1.5% issuance cost. And as mentioned previously, the coverage requirement on those is a 1.25 times your net revenues. And they also require a set aside of a restricted reserve that's equal to 1 year's debt, principal, and interest payment on the bonds that's then used in the last year to make the last payment. The USDA loan is, again, targeted for a couple specific projects in the water utility for 2011. It has a 40-year term, 3.5% interest rate, and no issuance cost or no required reserves. And I believe there's currently an application in process for that. Looking at the results for the water utility, first looking at the capital spending plan, this just gives a kind of a look from a bar chart from year to year what the capital expenditures are in the water utility. You can see they vary from year to year, about $5 million in the first year, and about $5 million again in 2013, and just under $5 million in 2015. So as is the nature with capital projects, they don't come in a nice smooth annual forecast. They go up and down as the rates are needed. Just to give a quick idea of what's happening in these years, kind of the major projects. 2011, it's a Zone 4 reservoir, West Street improvements, and East Street water line. In 2013, the major projects are Zone 3 reservoir and the Zone 4A reservoir and pump station. And then in that final year, the major project is the groundwater expansion project. Then the next slide looks at how we're proposing the city fund that capital improvement program over the study period. So looking at it in total, the capital projects total about $15.3 million over the study period. The plan is to bond finance about 67% of that. The USDA loan would be about 24% of that, and the remaining comes from available cash on hand plus collections of the system development charges over time. Looking at the overall needs, then putting together the policies and the capital program funding and an operating forecast looks at what the overall picture is for the water utility over the next 5 years. So the bottom chart shows the annual cash operating expenditures. You can see they're right around $2 million, increasing to, looks like just about under $2.5 million. Again, that's increasing with annual inflation. The green bars are the already committed obligations on existing debt service. Now the purple bar is any new debt service. This is the debt service that's being proposed necessary to fund the capital program. And then the top blue chart is the phase-in of the system reinvestment or rate-funded depreciation. So what you can see is the red line going across the middle there. That is the city's water utility rates currently as they are now under the existing rate structures and rate level. And you can see that they're currently funding the operating expenditures and some of the existing debt service, but there's a shortfall in funding the remaining